I'm Catherine, I'm 42. And 1 week after I buried my husband of 15 years, his 28-year-old mistress knocked on my door with a suitcase and a 5-month pregnancy, and I invited her in for coffee. This is not a forgiveness story. Not really. It's a story about what happens when the person you built your life around dies, and the woman he built a second life with shows up at your door needing rescue. It's about curiosity as revenge, kindness as weapon, and the strange, cold satisfaction of watching someone realize they were never as special as they thought. Welcome to Little Bunny Stories, where we tell quiet stories about families, about the lies we live inside and the truths that evict us, and about the strength it takes to rebuild yourself from the wreckage of a life you didn't know was borrowed. If a story ever made you feel less alone, that's why we're here. Drop a comment, hit subscribe, and let's walk through this one together. Here's my story. The morning Richard died, I was choosing tile, not for anything important. A bathroom renovation for a client in Cherry Hills, a woman who wanted marble but couldn't afford it and would spend 6 months pretending she could. I was standing in the showroom, holding 2 samples of porcelain against the light when my phone rang. It was Richard's Jim. The manager, a young man whose name I forgot immediately, told me there had been an incident. Richard had collapsed on the treadmill. Paramedics had come. They had done everything they could. He was gone before he reached the hospital. I thanked the manager. I put the tile samples back on the shelf carefully in the correct order. I drove home. I called my children Marcus, 16, at his friend's house, Lily, 14, at school. I told them their father was dead. I listened to them cry and I made the sounds a mother makes, the shushing and the "it's going to be okay" that you say because someone has to say something. Then I sat in our kitchen, the kitchen Richard and I had renovated 12 years ago, the one with the granite countertops and the pendant lights I'd chosen because they looked like something from a magazine, and I waited to feel something. I waited for 3 days. Through the funeral planning, the calls from relatives, the casseroles delivered by neighbors who used death as a social occasion. I wore black, I accepted condolences. I hugged people who smelled like perfume and grief and relief that it wasn't their husband. On the 4th day I felt something. It wasn't grief. It was anger, a low, steady burn like indigestion. I couldn't name it, I didn't try. On the 7th day Alina knocked. It was a Tuesday, 10 a.m. I was in my robe, drinking coffee that had gone cold, staring at a list of thank you notes I needed to write for funeral flowers. Doorbell rang, and I assumed it was another casserole, another neighbor, another well-wisher with a story about Richard's golf game or his work ethic or his wonderful smile. I opened the door to a woman I didn't recognize. Young, 20-something, blonde hair that looked expensive, a coat that definitely was. She was pretty in a way that felt deliberate, every feature balanced, every color chosen, every inch of her curated for maximum effect. Mrs. Bennet. Her voice was soft, uncertain, the voice of someone who had rehearsed this moment and still didn't know how it would go. Yes, I'm Elena Voss. She paused, waiting for recognition. When I didn't react, she added, I knew Richard, I worked with him. I looked at her, really looked at her. The coat, the hair, the careful makeup that couldn't hide the dark circles under her eyes. The small suitcase beside her on the porch. The way she held her hands over her stomach, protective, unconscious. Worked with him, I repeated. Yes, at the bank, I was in marketing. She was lying. I could hear it in the hesitation, see it in the way her eyes flicked away from mine. I know this is strange coming here, but I didn't know where else to go. The apartment. Richard paid for my apartment, and now the landlord says the lease was in his name and they're evicting me and I have nowhere. Why are you here, Alina? She looked at me then, really looked at me the way I was looking at her. And I saw it, the fear, the desperation, the calculation. She was young enough to believe that charm could solve anything, that a pretty face and a sad story could open any door. I'm pregnant, she said. 5 months, it's Richard's. I should have slammed the door. I know that now. Every instinct I had, every cultural script I'd internalized over 42 years of being a woman, told me to scream, to cry, to call her names and threaten lawsuits and demand DNA tests. Instead, I stepped aside and opened the door wider. You'd better come in, I said. It's cold out. I made her coffee. Real coffee in the good mugs, the ones we saved for company. I sat her at the kitchen island, the same island where I'd told my children their father was dead, and I listened to her story. Richard had met her at a bar, she said, not the bank. A wine bar downtown, where she was a server and he was a regular who came in on Tuesdays and Thursdays after working late. He'd told her he was separated, that the marriage was for the kids, that he and his wife hadn't slept in the same room in years. None of it was true, of course. We slept in the same room every night. We had sex twice a month, regular as a mortgage payment. We were fine. We were stable. We were the couple everyone assumed would make it. He'd moved her into an apartment 6 months after they met. Paid the rent, the utilities, bought her furniture from West Elm. He'd visit Tuesdays and Thursdays, the days he told me he had client dinners. Sometimes Saturdays when he said he was golfing. He'd been careful, she said, always careful, never stayed the night, never left evidence. I loved him, Alina said, tears streaming down her face. Real tears, I thought, or very good ones. I know that sounds crazy, given everything, but I did. He was kind to me, he listened to me, he made me feel like I mattered. I watched her cry and felt nothing. Not pity, not rage, not the satisfaction of vindication. Just a strange, detached curiosity, like observing an animal in a habitat I didn't understand. How old are you, Alina? 28. And you believed a 47-year-old married man who told you he was separated. I wanted to believe him. She looked up at me, her eyes red-rimmed, her mascara smeared. I needed to believe someone wanted me, that I was worth wanting. I understood that. I understood it better than I wanted to, because wasn't that what I'd done for 15 years? Believed Richard wanted me. Believed I was worth wanting. Built an entire life on the assumption that his attention, his presence, his twice-monthly sex meant I mattered. How much is the rent on your apartment? I asked. $2,200, but they want me out by Friday and I don't have savings. Richard handled everything. I was dependent on him. Dependent, the word hung in the air. I thought of my own dependencies, the house in his name, the bank accounts we shared, the retirement fund he managed, the life I'd built inside his structure, never questioning whether I could stand on my own. You can stay here, I said. Alina's head snapped up. What? Until you figure things out. The guest room, it's furnished. There's a bathroom. You can have your coffee in the kitchen, but I expect you to clean up after yourself. And you'll need to tell me your scheduled doctor's appointments, whatever, so I know when you're coming and going. Why would you do that? It was a fair question. One I'd asked myself in the 30 seconds between her confession and my invitation. Why would I let this woman, this evidence of my husband's betrayal, into my home? Why would I cook for her, house her, drive her to prenatal appointments? Because, I said, and my voice was steady, calm, the voice of someone who had already decided and would not be questioned. I want to understand what he saw in you, and I want you to understand what you actually had. Not the story you told yourself, the real thing. The Tuesdays and Thursdays, the lies, the fact that he never, not once, intended to leave me. That's cruel, she whispered. No, Alina, cruel would be throwing you out on the street pregnant and penniless. This is something else, this is education. She moved in that afternoon. I helped her carry her suitcase, one small roller bag, everything she owned in the world up to the guest room. It was a nice room, decorated in grays and whites with a view of the backyard. Richard had chosen the paint color. I'd never thought about that before. My children were at school. I would tell them later, I decided. Or not. Marcus was 16, old enough to understand adult complications. Lily was 14, still believing in the simplified morality of childhood. I didn't know how to explain Alina to either of them. I wasn't sure I could explain Alina to myself. The first week was polite. Alina stayed in her room mostly, emerging for meals, thanking me quietly, offering to help with dishes. I cooked dinner every night, the same meals I'd cooked for 15 years. The rotation of chicken and pasta and fish that Richard had never complained about and never praised. Alina ate everything. She was eating for two, she said, though she looked nauseated half the time. I drove her to her first doctor's appointment, sat in the waiting room while she was examined, drove her home. She tried to make conversation in the car about the weather, about a song on the radio, about anything normal. I answered in monosyllables. I wasn't being rude. I was being precise. Every word I gave her was measured, weighed, delivered with the exact amount of warmth required to maintain the illusion that this arrangement was charitable rather than experimental. Because that's what it was, an experiment. I was studying her the way I'd studied tile samples, holding her up to the light, examining her patterns, trying to understand what Richard had seen that made him risk everything. She was young, yes. Pretty, yes. But there was something else. A neediness, a hunger for attention that she tried to hide under sophistication and failed. She talked about her career in marketing, but when I asked specifics, the story crumbled. She'd been a server, then a receptionist, then unemployed. She talked about her friends, but never named them, never described them, never mentioned spending time with anyone except Richard. She was alone. That was the thing I realized first. Richard hadn't chosen someone vibrant, someone with a full life he wanted to join. He'd chosen someone empty, someone he could fill with whatever story he wanted to tell. Someone who would believe him because she needed to believe in something, just like me. The thought arrived uninvited, unwelcome, undeniable. Wasn't I the same? Hadn't I built my entire identity around being Richard's wife, filling the space he provided, believing the story he told about our marriage? The only difference was time. Alina had 2 years of illusion. I had 15. The second week I started asking questions. Over dinner, casual, the way you'd ask about someone's day. Where did Richard take you for dates? Alina hesitated, her fork halfway to her mouth. Mostly the apartment, sometimes restaurants, nothing fancy. Which restaurants? Just places, a steakhouse downtown, an Italian place in Lodoo. I knew them. The steakhouse was where Richard took clients. The Italian place was where we'd celebrated our 10th anniversary. He hadn't taken her anywhere he hadn't already taken me. He hadn't created new experiences for her. He just repeated the ones he knew, the comfortable patterns, the path of least resistance. Did he ever talk about me? Alina set down her fork. Mrs. Bennet, Catherine, if you're going to live in my house, you can use my name. Catherine, she swallowed. He said you were. He said you were focused on your career. That you didn't need him the way he needed to be needed, that you were independent. Independent. The word I'd spent 15 years trying not to be because Richard had seemed to need someone who depended on him. The word he'd used to justify his absence, to make himself the victim of my competence. And did he need you, Alina? Did he need you to need him? I thought so. I thought I made him feel important. Like he mattered. You did. That's exactly what you did. You made him feel important by making yourself small enough to fit inside his lies. The question is whether that made you important too, or just convenient. Alina's face crumpled. She pushed back from the table, her chair scraping loudly, and ran to her room. I sat alone in the kitchen, finishing my wine, and felt the strange satisfaction of a point scored in a game I hadn't agreed to play. My children found out on the 3rd week. Marcus came home early from school, caught Alina in the kitchen making tea, and demanded to know who she was. I told him the truth, not all of it, but enough. That Alina had known his father, that she was having a baby, that she needed a place to stay temporarily. She's his girlfriend, Marcus said, not a question. A statement delivered with the flat certainty of a 16-year-old who'd already learned that adults lie. She was. I admitted, and you're letting her live here? Yes, why? The same question Alina had asked, the same question I was still answering for myself. Because I need to understand, I said. And because throwing her out won't change what your father did. It won't make me less hurt or you less angry. It will just make me someone who punished a pregnant woman for my husband's choices. Marcus looked at me with eyes that were Richard's, the same brown, the same shape, the same ability to see through performance to truth. You're not as okay as you pretend, Mom. No, I said, I'm not. He nodded once and went to his room. He didn't speak to Alina for 3 days. Then on the 4th day I found them in the kitchen, Marcus showing her how to make his father's scrambled eggs, the way Richard had taught him, slow and patient, with butter and cream. Alina was watching, actually watching, her hands resting on her growing stomach. And Marcus was talking, actually talking, about his father's golf swing and his terrible jokes, and the way he always forgot birthdays but never forgot to apologize. I stood in the doorway and listened, and for the first time since Richard died, I felt something like grief. Real grief, not the performance of it. The loss of the man I'd thought he was, the marriage I'd thought I had, the life I'd built on foundations that turned out to be sand. The confession came on a rainy Thursday, 6 weeks after Alina moved in. We were in the kitchen, me cooking, her setting the table, the domestic rhythm we'd fallen into without discussing. She was 7 months pregnant now, her stomach round and prominent, her movement slower, her energy lower. I need to tell you something, she said. I kept stirring the sauce. Tell me. The things I said about Richard, about us. She sat down heavily, one hand on her back. I exaggerated, some of it, a lot of it. Which parts? The love, the relationship. She wouldn't look at me. He never said he loved me, he never promised to leave you, he paid my rent, he visited twice a week, he bought me things, but he never made me feel like I was his future. I was his Tuesday, his Thursday, his escape from whatever he was escaping from. I turned off the stove, faced her. Why are you telling me this? Because I can't keep pretending. Not in your house. Not while you cook for me and drive me to appointments and treat me like a person who deserves care. I thought you were going to destroy me. I thought you'd scream and threaten and make my life hell, and instead you just stayed, present, watching, And it made everything I told myself about you feel like a lie too. What did you tell yourself about me? That you were cold, that you didn't love him, that you were the reason he needed someone else. She finally looked at me, her eyes wet. But you're not cold, you're just someone who was lied to, same as me, and you're handling it better than I ever could. I sat across from her, close enough to see the pores in her skin, the fine lines around her eyes, the small scar on her chin she'd tried to cover with makeup. She wasn't a villain, she wasn't a seductress. She was a 28-year-old woman who'd believed a man's lies because she needed to believe in something, and who was now realizing that the something had never existed. I recorded you, I said. Elena's face went blank. What? That night, 3 weeks ago. When you told me Richard said I was independent. When you talked about the restaurants, the apartment, the way he made you feel. I pulled out my phone, set it on the table between us. I have it all. Clear audio. Your voice, your words, your story. Why? Because I needed insurance, because I didn't trust you, because after 15 years of trusting a man who lied to me every Tuesday and Thursday, I don't trust anyone anymore. Elena looked at the phone, then at me. What are you going to do with it? Nothing. I'm not going to post it. I'm not going to use it in court. I'm not going to destroy you with it. I slid the phone back into my pocket. I'm going to keep it. It's proof that I wasn't crazy, that my marriage wasn't what I thought it was, that the man I buried wasn't the man I married. And me, what happens to me? I looked at her. At the baby growing inside her, the baby that was half Richard and half stranger. At the woman who'd invaded my life and become, despite everything, someone I understood better than I wanted to. You have two choices, I said. You stay until the baby is born. You have her here in this house with me helping. And then you leave, you take your daughter and the $20,000 I'll give you and you build a life somewhere else. You never contact my children. You never claim anything from Richard's estate. You disappear completely and forever. Or you leave now, tonight, with nothing. I'll help you find a shelter, a social worker, whatever you need. But you'll have nothing from me and nothing from Richard's memory. You'll be on your own, the way you were before you met him. Elena was quiet for a long time. The rain against the windows, the clock on the wall, the distant sound of Lily's music from upstairs. Then she placed her hand on her stomach, feeling the baby kick, and she looked at me with something I hadn't seen before. Respect, maybe, or fear, or the dawning understanding that I was not the woman she'd been told I was. I'll stay, she said, until she's born, and then I'll go. Good, I said. Now set the table. Dinner's ready. The baby was born on a Tuesday. Of course it was a Tuesday, Richard's day, the day he'd visited Elena, the day he'd lied to me about client dinners. I drove her to the hospital, sat in the waiting room, drank bad coffee from a paper cup. Marcus and Lily came later, Lily curious and nervous, Marcus quiet and protective. It was a girl. 7 pounds, 3 ounces, with Richard's brown eyes and Elena's blonde hair. Elena named her Ava, a name she'd never discussed with me, a name that meant nothing and everything. When they brought the baby to the room, Elena held her for a moment, then looked at me. Do you want to hold her? I should have said no. I should have walked out, maintained my distance, kept the boundaries I'd established. But I was tired. Tired of being strong, tired of being strategic, tired of the careful architecture I'd built around my grief and my anger. I held Ava. She was warm, impossibly light, her small face scrunched and red and perfect. She opened her eyes, Richard's eyes, and looked at me with the blank, trusting gaze of someone who didn't know anything about lies or betrayal or the cost of being wanted. I felt it then. The thing I'd been avoiding for 10 weeks. Pity, not for Elena, not for Richard. For this child who would grow up without a father, without a stable home, without the simple luxury of parents who loved each other. For the life she would live, marked by the choices of adults who never thought about consequences. I handed her back to Elena. She's beautiful, I said, and I meant it. Elena left 3 days later. I gave her the $20,000 cash in an envelope, no receipt, no record. She took Ava, a car seat I'd bought, a bag of diapers, and the address of a women's shelter in California where she said she had a cousin. I didn't verify. I didn't follow up. I closed the door and listened to her car drive away and felt nothing for exactly 6 minutes. Then I sat on the floor of my kitchen. The kitchen Richard had chosen, the kitchen where Elena had cried, the kitchen where I'd learned everything I didn't want to know, and I wept. Not for Richard. Not for Elena, for myself. For the 15 years I'd spent being the wife he needed, while he spent 2 years being the man Elena needed, while neither of us was ever the person the other actually wanted. I wept for the tile samples I'd been holding when he died. For the thank you notes I never wrote. For the life I'd built on the assumption that stability was the same as love. For the woman I'd been careful, controlled, competent, and the woman I might have been if I demanded more, expected more, been more. When I finished crying, I stood up. I washed my face. I called a real estate agent and asked her to list the house. I called a contractor about renting office space downtown. I called my mother and told her simply, I'm starting over. She didn't ask what I meant. She just said, about time. That was a year ago. I live in a loft now downtown above my design studio. Small, imperfect, completely mine. Marcus visits on weekends, bringing laundry and sarcasm and the occasional insight that reminds me he's becoming someone worth knowing. Lily lives with me full-time. She chose it, chose me, chose the chaos of a new life over the ghosts of the old one. I received a letter last month. No return address, postmarked Santa Monica. A photo inside, Ava, walking now, blonde curls, Richard's eyes, smiling at something off-camera. And a note, in Alina's careful handwriting, thank you for not destroying me. I keep it in a drawer, not a frame, not a shrine, just a drawer. I look at it sometimes when I'm alone, when the studio is quiet and the city is sleeping, and I think I didn't destroy her because destroying her wouldn't have rebuilt me. I didn't forgive her because forgiveness requires something I'm not ready to give. I just let her go. And in letting her go, I let go of the last piece of the life I thought I had. Richard is buried in Fairmount Cemetery. Under a headstone I chose, gray granite, his name, his dates, nothing else. I don't visit, I don't need to. The man I visit is the one I married, and he never existed. The man who existed is someone I never knew, someone who visited another woman on Tuesdays and Thursdays and called it love. I'm 43 now. I date occasionally, badly, with the caution of someone who's learned that people lie and that the lies are usually more interesting than the truth. I have friends, real ones, who know my story and don't try to fix it. I have work I love, spaces I design for people who want their homes to reflect something true about themselves. And I have myself. The woman who chose curiosity over cruelty, who let her husband's mistress live in her house and learned from her instead of destroying her. The woman who rebuilt herself from the wreckage of a perfect marriage, one tile sample at a time. That's my story. If someone made you feel like you had to be perfect to be loved, hear me, you don't. Perfection is just a lie that keeps you small. The real work is showing up, flawed and uncertain, and building something honest from whatever materials you have. I'm Catherine. I'm 43. I was married for 15 years to a man who loved me on Mondays, Wednesdays, Fridays, Saturdays, and Sundays. And I survived finding out what he did on Tuesdays and Thursdays. Not because I'm strong, because I had no other choice. And sometimes that's enough. See you in the next story.